Here we go. Another week of the UNLV All Access podcast. Now, as we tape, just 11 days away from the opener in Houston. It goes by quickly. I think this camp has been fascinating. What I've got to watch at practice has been cool. The quarterback race is cool. The improved depth is awesome. So we'll get into a lot of those subjects. Caleb Herring is here. Of course, he's the co-host of the UNLV All Access podcast, former quarterback with the Rebels. So what's your vibe of late with camp and kind of the excitement building for this Rebel team, which I think is going to be more talented and deeper than last year?
It's kind of crazy, first of all, that the season's that close. It doesn't seem like it was hurry up and wait for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's here. It's like a week away, basically, from a real game prep. It's crazy. But it's a different feeling, maybe, that I'm not used to. I think Rebel fans might agree with me with this, where it's like, the question marks about the season aren't so much as, are we going to be good this year? Are we going to win? What's the product on the field going to be? I think this is the first time in a while, or since I've been in Las Vegas, where UNLV football had expectations going into a season. And I think there's kind of a nervous anxiety, if I'm being honest, about, will you follow through? Will Barry Odom and the crew in year two duplicate the efforts or come close to duplicating efforts of last year? Is it time to prove the fluke wasn't a 1 year thing type of feeling? And it's crazy because the closer we get, the more I feel it, from fans. And we have access to see practice and actually see that the team is improved. We know that some of the roster improvement, the depth, like you mentioned, has made the team better. And I think they will be a better team. But football's a crazy thing where it's like, that doesn't always bear fruit. Like, you don't always see the better on Saturdays. And I said that in the past with what I thought to be good UNLV teams that didn't make a bowl game or that didn't get to 6 wins or whatever the case may be. I don't think that that's going to be the case with this group, and that makes me excited. It's right. Exciting to say, like, okay, this one though, I'm not as scared. I just can't wait to see it happen. And it's going to be tough because of what I think is going to be a tough opponent right out of the gates. And there are big questions left to be answered for UNLV as we wind up fall camp. The biggest of them, obviously, the quarterback situation and who's going to get the start there. That's everybody's favorite question to ask. So having that question going into a season, as this week you watch college football and in the NFL, a lot of teams named a starting quarterback. So UNLV has not as of yet, but when that decision comes out, I think people will have one less question to worry about, and then they can just focus on enjoying whatever the season has to offer.
Yeah, big questions to be answered. Last year, they won a lot of close games. I mean, the record's deceiving because I usually track close games within one score, so 8 points or less. So they were 3-2 in those games. That doesn't sound great. It's good. But they also had a lot of close games that they widened the lead as it went along. And remember back to, both you and I agree on Marcus Arroyo. Like, he could still be here if he won close games, but it just didn't happen. They went 1-10, and games are 8 points or less. So can they, because generally that flips the close game victories, but they were 3-2. Can they duplicate that? And we'll get to the quarterback stuff. I think the quarterback stuff is just fascinating. All right. We want to start out talking about the running back room. We got access this week, media-wise, to Jet Thomas and Greg Burrell. I'll tell you some things that those guys said, but Cornell Ford is a wealth of knowledge. He's the running backs coach. So let's give this a listen as he talks about Greg Burrell. And this is one of the reasons people should really be excited. You're talking about a hometown guy has come in. They've deemed him good enough in all aspects of the game to be on the field. That is rare for a freshman. We saw it last year with Jet Thomas. This is a different breed, though. We're talking about a 3-star, 4-star guy, 6'1", 205, like, has the look. Listen to Ford talk about mostly positives and then some things that Greg Burrell has to clean up.
So talented. And he's got so much growth. His ceiling is so high. He's catches the ball well. He's athletic with the ball in his hands, getting out of the backfield. He actually is a pretty tough kid in blocking and his protections. He just needs, like Jet last year, just needs to get bigger and stronger and faster. And when he does that, I mean, he's really going to be something special. We feel like we got a great one there. But he's got to continue to grow and maturity. Sometimes he acts like a high school kid at times. And we just got to try to bring him along and understand that he's a young guy. But we expect a lot of great things out of him this year.
What does that mean, acting like a high school kid? And, like, what are those traits where you're like, you got to get rid of those habits?
Sometimes he thinks he's tired when he isn't tired. You know, sometimes you got to be able to fight through that. And young guys will tap out fast. And we're trying to get guys that won't tap out. You know, I mean, when you think you're tired, you got to be ready to play through that. You got to be ready to play through pain. There's one thing with being injured, and then there's another one just being, you know, kind of banged up a little bit. And we're all at this point in the season, everybody's banged up. But high school kids tend to think they're hurt, you know, like they can't play anymore. It's like, oh my gosh, my arm's going to fall off. No, you're going to be just fine. Play through it, fight through it, and let's get on to the next play. And then 2-3 plays later, you're playing regular football. So you really weren't hurt. You just thought you were. So typical high school guys sometimes.
Very interesting. I think some people will take that as like, what's going on with this guy? That's kind of crazy. But there is a toughness at running back. Explain what he was talking about there. Running backs that you've been around, and as they get older, they realize, hey, you know what? I got to fight through everything. And also, I'll tell you, Cornell Ford followed it up later by saying, listen, if you want to tap out, you may not get back in for 18 runs. If someone else gets in a rhythm, you may be off the field for a while.
Yeah, I think with every position group, it's true. Making the transition from high school to college, and I guess from any level to the next, there's certain things you got to shake. There's certain habits you got to break, which is probably one of the hardest things, if I'm being honest, to break old habits and form new ones in their place. One of those things is taking reps off, and I'll say just from speaking to the tired aspect of that, I know I personally dealt with this where I would think I was tired, and I would be like, okay, this next rep I'm going to coast, try to catch my breath. And then the coasting becomes a habit where you're like, okay, I'm coasting and I can coast through practice. And you sort of give yourself permission to coast or take reps off. And with the way that practice is for UNLV, especially, you can't take reps off. Every rep counts. It's you're trying to get the most out of yourself and out of the team and out of the look, whatever the case is. So I think that's the fatigue factor is one of those things. You're pushing yourself to a different level than you've ever been pushed. In high school, the weightlifting, the conditioning, the practice even was nowhere near as intense as college is. So not only are you trying to make gains in the weight room, your conditioning level is different. The amount of reps you're getting in practice, crazy compared to high school, just the structure of things. So you feel like you're tired a lot faster. And unless you push through that, unless you break through that tired spell, then you'll never acclimate to what it is to be a college player. So that's the youth, the young legs, I guess, maybe little wet legs when you're out there sometimes. It's tough to get over. I'm surprised to hear, though, the blocking was mentioned as one of the things that he's good at. And that's usually what running backs struggle with out of the gates. And we've talked about this as far as your ability to get on the field as a running back. A lot of the time hinges on, can you protect as well? Are you getting bullied out there in protection? Are you in the wrong fit with the offensive line? Do you not have that down? Usually young running backs struggle with that. So to hear that he's up to pace with that, at least, maybe, of course, you have to improve, like most freshmen will. But to hear that he's playable at this point with where he is now is a good sign for a freshman. We know they take the age off of guys, as Jet is an example of last year, freshman that came in and hit the ground running. I don't see any reason why Greg wouldn't be the same case. From what we hear, from what we've seen, he's a monster out there. He's massive for a freshman running back. And to see that his frame could probably carry another 10 pounds, maybe 15 comfortably, that's encouraging as well for his career and his longevity. So for freshmen, breaking the habits, that's the toughest thing. Good for him that he came in, got a summer program under his belt, the spring and the summer under his belt. So his acclimation phase isn't going to be as quick as those freshmen that came in the fall. And I think that will help him. And I think that has a lot to do with why they think he's ready to go for the fall. But I'm excited to hear those kind of things. And hopefully those habits shed and he has winning habits. It's really easy, I think, for an organization, a program, to help establish good habits when you have winning to back up what you're saying. Like Coach Odom and the staff have last year's success. What Jaden Thomas did as an example to anybody who comes in and questions what a winning habit is. So if I tell, Coach Cornell tells a freshman, this is why you need to run hard through that rep. This is why you need to push through because you're not really hurt. It's because that's what made Jaden successful in his freshman year. And you want to be that, don't you? So you fall in line a lot quicker. It's really hard to convince somebody to follow your guidelines if you haven't won anything or done anything to back it up. And the most recent thing is last year. So if he leans on that, he'll break those habits and get into the winning ones that they're trying to establish this year.
From the talk and what we're seeing in practice, they're going to run out of different sets. They did a lot of two-back sets last year and oftentimes with two little guys. I asked Cornell Ford about the different looks and what changes for the running back in those different looks.
What's the difference for a running back running out of a two-back set versus one back? We're seeing a little more one back or, with a full back out there.
Yeah, I mean, the two-back game is really a downhill, physical style of running. And you really don't see that as much nowadays. Everybody's kind of spread and empty and want to go fast. And it's usually one back in the backfield. And we have the ability to do that. But we want to be able to put two guys back there and run right at you. We're not going to make any, we're not trying to psych anybody out. We want you to know we're coming after you. And if you want to win games, tough, physical, downhill football, running the football, all great teams should be able to do that. And that's what we're trying to do.
I think it's interesting to hear the way that to see, first of all, the way that they use the running backs in the backfield and the way that those concepts with the running back actually translate to your normal 11 personnel runs, where they're actually sometimes acting like what the tight end would be doing or what the slot receiver would be doing in a lot of these instances. But it's interesting because not only does that give some variability to what each person is doing, like a tight end slip into the flat. Like if you saw just a defensive key, if you saw Kaleo Belongai lined up in an offset attached tight end, like a wing position, you're thinking as a linebacker, okay, watch if he goes across the back of the formation, the play action slip out to the opposite flat, right? That's kind of in your head. But you wouldn't think that when you have two running backs, but they essentially could get to the same places where you run in zone split and the second running back comes out the backside in the flat. And that just messes with your eye discipline if you're a defense. So they give themselves a lot of advantages with the formational tweaks that they have, and then mixing in personnel with those tweaks. It's not always two running backs. There could be a tight end back there, a receiver. We've seen receivers in the backfield at times for UNLV. So they can get so multiple with their run game. I like, though, that they have the capacity to put a running back essentially in a tight end's blocking position. And I just wonder what that's like to teach. And that's one of the concepts of the go-go offense that I'm interested to know about, is how you teach that, because it would seem, just my guess, that everybody has to have an understanding of every position, which that's great for the football IQ and the education of the game and advancing and everybody being on the same page. It's not always like that. A lot of times it's a quarterback that has knowledge of what everybody has to do. But if I'm a running back and I need to know, okay, this play, I'm acting as the tight end. I'm the split back. I'm the first guy through, but I'm picking up that D end. Or my gap, I'm supposed to block the linebacker through the A gap because that's what I'm supposed to do in this out of this set. And then also with the misdirection, watching UNLV on tape a lot of times, the running back action affects the flow of the defense so much that your target for where you're going to block oftentimes is very different than a traditional run out of a regular base set, right? Like inside zone with a single back, it's kind of self-explanatory. But when you have two running backs crisscrossing in the back, the linebackers could be completely out of position by the time you climb into that next level to make that block. So everybody has to have an awareness of like what's going on the back end, so I know how to change my angles to get the blocks. And the running backs are no exception to that, right? They have to understand blocking schemes. Even though they're out of an unconventional formation, I'm still trying to hit the A gap with this run. I'm still trying to get downhill, or I still have to be patient for this puller. So there's a lot of different tweaks of the offense that are so unconventional. And I think it gives the offense an advantage, especially in year two, when you got guys that are familiar with it. They're not learning it as much as they were last year. I'm interested to see how the running backs take that next step, how much more complicated the stuff in the backfield gets with the action, and then how much faster they're able to execute everything, because like they're expecting in year two to go a lot faster, get a lot more reps, and have a lot more plays every game. So we might see a very much more up-tempo version of the go-go this year than last.
So a couple of notes to put out there. One, it was Shearer last week talking about Kylan James, who's in the rotation of running backs, who's a transfer from Central Arkansas, who's 6'1" and 220. And the surprising thing about his numbers in the past, he's really a good pass catcher. I think they brought him in as maybe not the designated pass catcher, but he's a guy who caught 35-plus passes in each of his 2 years. And the other one I liked was from Cornell Ford, who said, when you've got Ricky and you've got DeJesus, and then you've got the X position with Casey Kane or Jaden Bradley, and then you've got Kaleo, he said, we have got to catch the ball, and we have to be dangerous, because we may be the one place where we can help out when those guys are all covered. And I thought that was interesting that there's a little bit of pressure on the running backs. Like, you've got to be a weapon. You've got to be able to go and catch something 5 yards and make a big play out of it.
And the quarterbacks, I would say, just to build on that, the quarterbacks have to understand that is the case too, to not be afraid to use the weapons of your check down. And that sounds crazy. I know this is like quarterbacking 101. People hate the check down.
People hate the check down, but
it's so, and like, as you know, quarterback who I studied Peyton Manning, and I watch and listen to him talk, and how the check down was his best friend in a lot of those situations, where, you know, you're trying to get a drive going, and you end up having to come down to your running back. And you don't think, you know, Ricky White's going to get bracket coverage. You're going to have a safety over the top of your X receiver. They're going to put a nickel on Kaleo a lot of times in passing situations. So a lot of eyes are going to be on those guys. You can't have your running back be a liability in the pass game, because there's going to be opportunities for big time plays. And you can't always just, you know, throw a slip screen, because that's going to get kind of repetitive. Defense can react. You have to be able to, I think, and it's my opinion, that running backs that can run routes have a lot of success. And you look at guys like Christian McCaffrey in the NFL right now, the ability to run routes and make catches and make plays with the ball out in space after the catch is valuable. And I think this year, for the reasons you pointed out, teams are going to fall asleep on the running back as a pass catcher, right? Like, all the action in the backfield, if we're talking play action, everything going on in the backfield, the last person you're going to think about is the running back who just got the play fake leaking out into the flat. And you can catch that, get out in space, 10, 15 yards a pop. Those kind of plays make the difference in the game. Like 3 or 4 of those in each game, whether it's, you know, in play action formations or alleviating pressure from blitzes. That's where running backs, I think, can make a lot of money in the pass game, is when a team likes to blitz and they like to run man-to-man, running back slipping out of the backfield is one of the easiest ways to get chunk yardage after the catch, right? An easy 5-yard gain. If you catch it clean, there's a lot of space between you and the next defender if the blitz is to the wrong side, or if you slip out undetected. So they have to be valuable. And I think the understanding of that, I think, started last year, because they did have some receiving opportunities as running backs. And there were some routes that had guys going down the field, like running wheel routes out of the backfield a couple of times. So they are going to be important. They're going to be vital. And not just in the run game, they have to help alleviate the pass protection. And like a tight end in the pass game, I think running backs are going to be a quarterback's best friend, especially with two quarterbacks. Either whatever quarterback starts is going to be starting for the first time this season, right? Like, I guess you go Cam Friel, technically he's started before, but not in this offense. So being a check down that's available for them, I think a sure-handed running back to dump it down to when things get dicey down the field will be a comfort zone for the quarterbacks, just like the tight ends.
So you had some concerns a couple weeks ago about the running backs on this team in the running back room. Where are you now?
I feel better. Like I said, I trust this coaching staff when they say something. So if you know, Coach Odom, Coach Ford, they both say that they feel like 5 or 6 guys could play. If the game was this week, they feel like they could run 5 guys out there that would play. That makes me feel good, because I think not just I do think they want to, as a part of their system, a part of their rotate guys and how the go-go operates, right? With 2 running backs potentially at a time. Most don't do that. So I think as a part of the system, they need that. But I don't think they were willing to force it if they didn't have it. And I don't believe that they would just speak on guys like Greg Burrell as highly as they do, or Kylan James, if they really didn't see something to help. And from what I've seen, I think they had the potential there, but it's just a matter if they can get used to the protection, get those freshman habits or those newcomer habits eliminated by the time the season starts. And it appears that they have. So I feel a lot better than I did at the start of camp when it comes to the running back room. And most of it was just because the understanding of how it was kind of running back by committee all season long. Guys like Courtney Reese, I mean, Jaden Thomas gets a lot of credit, right? He was probably the feature back, especially early in the season. But Courtney Reese, Vincent Davis, Donovan Lester, and Jordan Young-Humphrey. You remember he went down early in the season, but he was actually a part of the running back rotation as well. So that was the 5-headed monster that was kind of running back by committee. They had one of the number 1 rushing offenses in the conference for most of the year, and not one game did one single rusher go over 100 yards. Like most of the games, there was like a collection of guys going for 60, 70, a couple of touchdowns each, and that was how they put up 300 yards of rushing offense, right, in a game or something like that. So that's, to me, it was always running back by committee. So there was questions about, with the turnover, would the committee still be there? And they've answered the question with some of the people they brought in, including incoming freshman Greg Burrell from Las Vegas. So I'm interested to see how it works still, but I'm a lot more confident now that I've heard, in the final week of camp, what Coach Odom and Coach Ford think, because they think they've got 5 guys that can go out and play at least.
Yeah, one other note, Jaden Thomas up probably, I would guess, 13 pounds. He's 5'9", 5'10". He told me the other day he weighs 188 now, and you can see it across the shoulders. He's bigger, so he's the little guy in a very big running back room, so it's good. They have the ability to go more power this year. We got access to talk tight ends with Nate Longshore. We're going to talk to Christian Moore here in just a little bit, but we kind of mined Longshore to set up the whole quarterback conversation. I don't know how many tight end coaches around the country actually played quarterback in college, and especially if they do, they don't look like a tight end. Like Nate Longshore is 6'6" and 280 pounds, but he's got that knowledge. I mean, he's a good tight ends coach, great tight ends recruiter, and he's got that experience playing quarterback at Cal. So at the press conference with Nate Longshore, kind of picked his brain on how the quarterbacks look so far and some of their leadership skills.
I think they all have the respect of the team in the ways that they lead. They're all very authentic, and I think that's kind of like the root of good leadership. So I'm excited about all 3 of those guys, and I think even Gael is an up-and-coming quarterback that we could win with. So that room is strong, and their leadership has done well for us this camp.
Is one of their biggest challenges the quarterbacks being able to throw over the middle, get it over both of the lines? And what are you observing?
I think that's probably a little overstated. I mean, the game is kind of transitioning to the athletic quarterbacks. I mean, those guys can move and create more passing lanes as opposed to, the taller guy who can see those lanes but maybe can't move as well. So while they give up maybe being able to see here and there, they're adding the elements that they add with their feet and their athleticism, I think outweighs, their lack of a couple inches.
Yeah, it was interesting today at practice. They ran a lot of stuff where it's just like Ballon guy out 5 yards, turn, boom. Then you go complete opposite from 6'7", 260 down to 5'6", 170. DeJesus out quick, 4 yards, boom, throw it to him. I know that was kind of a very elementary question about being able to see the target, execute it, not get it tipped. But what do you think of Longshore's answer about how the game's changed?
I think it has. I think we've seen over, the past decade or so, there's a lot more movement of pockets. People aren't, going from under center much, 5-step drop, standing there trying to see over the top. There's a lot more, first of all, visibility from the shotgun. Then there's a lot more pocket movement or manipulation within the structure of plays, whether it's sprint outs, whether it's zone read action in the backfield, just a token fake in the backfield that slides the protection naturally that way. So things are moving horizontally rather than vertically up the field towards you. So you get more space as a quarterback that way. I think there's a lot more misdirection going on. And then with the way, it might have, maybe it's not completely taken a hold yet, but I've seen and noticed that as the game has become more athletic from a quarterback standpoint, defensive have in turn gotten smaller and more quick and more agile. And maybe to some extent offensive lines as well. Like the 6'8" guys are not necessarily, the only guys getting looks on the offensive line anymore. There are still massive offensive linemen, but the prioritization of movement and your lateral quickness in all of these positions, because of how the game has sped up, I think is making size less and less of a problem. Then I go back. Obviously, there are going to be situations where your height's going to make an impact. And I see DeJesus over the middle on like a drag route, a shallow cross, and trying to find him for a guy that's not much taller than DeJesus being kind of an issue. So, right, there's no way around it. You learn how to work with it. But then I think these guys have been this height their whole career, right? Like they know how to manipulate windows and find lanes to throw through. And it's not like anybody's, teaching throw over the top always. Like when I was coming up your quarterback camps, your throwing motion had to be over the top. Like your arm had to come over the top of your head when you're releasing the ball. There's none of that sidearm stuff. Brett Favre was like a unicorn for doing it. But now it's like finding arm angles, finding lanes to throw the ball through is kind of second nature to these quarterbacks. And I don't see it being too big of an issue. Obviously, in the early going of the season, if something happens where they're getting passes batted down to the line of scrimmage a ton, you're gonna adjust. You're gonna make some adjustments and maybe move them out of the pocket a little bit more than you originally had planned. But I don't see it being too big of a problem, especially with the way this offense works. There's not a lot of times, even last year with Jaden Mayava, who I think is a pocket passer by nature. There wasn't a lot of times where he was standing in the pocket for extended periods of time and forced to look over the line of scrimmage down the middle too often. If he was looking down the middle, a lot of times it's for deeper, deep crosses or deep overs or vertical shots. So that depth down the field helps when you're a shorter quarterback, especially.
It was interesting listening to Long Short, too, talk about the transformation of the room with the tight ends. They're up to 8 tight ends. Now, a lot of them are developmental, but they're up to 8 tight ends. And then he even made the point, like at one point he was down to like 3. It got really thin, but he's done a good job of building it up. And Kaleo Belangai is an amazing story because he's the guy who couldn't stay healthy. Again, that developmental thing, and now he might be one of their best targets. I think he's an NFL prospect. He's 6'7" and 260 pounds. So they also added K-State's Christian Moore. Christian Moore is 6'2", 240. He told us today, pretty much at Kansas State, he played fullback. So, and they've referenced him as he's a thumper, right? But he's got some ball skills. They showed him video, and they showed him all the different ways he can be used. He's also a California guy, so he's playing closer to home. But what do you think about the recruitment of him and what it says and the way they want to use him? Because they haven't had a guy like that in the past.
I think it's interesting because it just adds a layer, right? A possibility. And we don't know for sure what the offense is going to look like. But like you said, the fact that tight end room has changed so drastically, I think you can make a safe bet that the tight ends are going to feature heavily, right? How that's going to look, is it going to be traditional 12 personnel? Are they going to be playing out of position? Mentioned being a fullback, but there's the potential with all of these athletes, maybe the position that they played in other systems, they saw enough to say, yeah, you've got the ball skills or the speed or the agility to switch over and kind of play a hybrid position where maybe you're tight end attached to the line of scrimmage a little more instead of playing from the backfield in a traditional fullback role. So those things are you talk about recruiting, and this is one I'll tip my hat again to Barry Odom and the staff. They've been very intentional about everybody they've recruited. And this goes back to even last year looking at Jacob DeJesus and D'Angelo Irving. Looking at those two guys, they're very specific builds, play styles where they're almost the same player. And D'Angelo Irving, it's going to be his turn eventually because I said it last year. He almost took a punt return to the end zone against New Mexico last year. But if you think Jacob DeJesus is good, when this guy fully matures and gets into his own, he's going to be, I think, another special talent similar to him. But they're the similar build, they're similar talent, and they play the game the same way. But that's a testament to the recruiting of UNLV right now. Like Coach Odom, Coach Marion, when they have a fit or a position that they can fill with their roster, they go out and get a guy that fills it. Whether it's traditional tight end, whether it's a fullback that they can change to a tight end, they're going to get a guy that fits what they want him to do. And then they're going to do things that highlight what he is or what he does. And we saw that with Jacob DeJesus last year. As the offense evolved and as DeJesus and everybody else got more comfortable, you saw him doing more and more. He wasn't just a wide receiver out there. He was multiple things. He ended up playing primarily running back in the bowl game for a good chunk of it. So that's the kind of thing that I like that this system and this coaching staff have done. They've taken guys and they've transformed them and maximized their talents within this system, within the structure on both sides of the ball. But especially with the offense and with the tight end room specifically, I think that position has been underutilized for years at UNLV. And I've long said this, you can attest this, the tight end is one of the most valuable pieces on the chessboard for any offense. And if you got good mismatches with your tight ends, Kaleo's a mismatch one way. His size, undeniable. He's a sixth offensive lineman, and he's sure-handed on third downs. And just look at the third down tape from UNLV last year. It feels like every third down they converted at the midway point of the season was to Kaleo. Whether it was the connection with Jade Mayava, whether it's just this offense uses tight ends more effectively, Kaleo had a great season last year because they utilized him. And maybe that's why there's a premium recruiting more tight ends or guys that can fit in as tight ends. And I'm excited to see what those tight ends on the depth chart bring to this offense. And we got some previews in the practices we've been to. There's more tight ends on the field for sure. How that's going to shape out as far as the structure with this 2 running back look. Is it going to be traditional 12 personnel, like I said, or are they going to do 21? What's it going to look like with all these tight ends? Just another thing for defenses to have to worry about and have to prep for.
Reminding everyone, we grabbed so much audio and video out there at camp. We're putting it out in multiple places, at Steve Cofield, at UNLV All Access, at ESPN Las Vegas, up on Twitter. It's going up on ESPN Las Vegas Instagram. Please give ESPN Las Vegas a follow on Instagram as we rebuild that page. Steve Cofield on Instagram and places I don't even know about. Eventually, well, I do know this. On YouTube, we're trying to put out more of the full press conferences. So we'll try to have those out for you, especially if UNLV doesn't post it. So audio and video is going out all the time. And I get frustrated because I can't get to all of it. There's so many good things. And coming this week, we're going to have video on and from James Shebest. What a great guy to pick the brain of. I mean, he's tremendous. And now that I've been around the program, and I'm sure you feel the same way, this coaching staff for a couple of years, year plus, you realize just the premium they put on special teams and how much they believe in it. And when we're out there to practice, we're like, man, they practice special teams a ton. And Barry Odom said this week, and he said it's one of the most important parts of the game. It's 20 plays. Because I keep picking at them, and I'm like, all right, Jackson Woodard, I don't say it this way, but Jackson Woodard can't play all the time. And Odom was like, no. Even if we have incredible depth, we want our best players on special teams. And he points to Woodard. He said Ricky White came so close to blocking punts last year. He's like, he's going to block a punt this year. You see the premium they put on returns and blocking schemes, but they have their guys out there. They're some of their best players on at least 2 units. It's pretty incredible, their dedication to special teams.
It is. And I wonder, because I didn't obviously know Barry Odom his whole coaching career, and my memory of him is from a recent reason, but I wonder how much of this philosophy on special teams was a result of the situation coming into UNLV versus just his philosophy overall. Because I hesitate to say it, but I think this has a lot to do with coming in, looking at the roster, looking at the situation, saying, how can I create advantages to win? Right. And one of the ways that he came to, and James Shebest coming along and being on board with it, was to create an advantage with special teams. And how can you find hidden yardage there? How can you turn the tide of games? How can you control field position using special teams, not necessarily putting all the pressure on your offense and defense? Because most teams, conventionally, most coaches will say what you said. I don't want my starters out there all the time. I don't want them getting worn out or, knock on wood, the risk of injury, right? I don't want that for my starters. So I'm going to put my third string guys out there, the guys that, aren't as involved, that I already have declared I don't trust as much because they don't start, right? They're not in the rotation. They can go run down on kickoff and get their exercise that way. But for UNLV, it's become a staple of who they are, that special teams is a priority. And I think even more important than wanting your starters to is that they've created a sense that it's an honor, like a badge of honor, to be on the special teams unit, to help Jacob DeJesus, to make that block that springs him for a big punt return, or to, if you're Ricky White, go after a punt and make an impact, or Marshall Nichols and connecting on a fake punt attempt. The way that everybody is engaged on UNLV's team in practice and in games with special teams is very unique to UNLV. I've been around football a long time. I've never seen a practice where special teams is prioritized the way it is at UNLV. And it shows. The grass is green where you water it. They water special teams. I want to say there's 4 separate full periods that are dedicated to special teams throughout the practice. At least 3 times during every practice, they will stop and do special teams. Once at the very beginning of practice, right? They do their teach period, and it's right in the special teams. And they spend a good 10, 15 minutes, it seems like, on special teams. Then they do their offense, their individual drills. Boom, back to special teams midway through practice. Then they do some more offense, defense drills. Then finish with special teams, right? There's a lot of special teams pride with UNLV. You don't get that everywhere, and it shows. They have an All-American special teams player, and they have a Ray Guy candidate in Marshall Nichols this year, because they prioritize special teams. It's one of the more fascinating things. And kudos, whichever way it is, whether Odom has always had this mentality or if it was an adjustment to say, I'm going to create an advantage somewhere on the field, it's going to be special teams. Either way, kudos to the coaching staff for being all in on it.
Yeah, the first time we heard him, he was talking about James Shebas, and he's like, I went out and got one of the best, if not the best, special teams coach in the country. And I was kind of like, oh, well, that's great. And then you watch how much they practice. And I love what you said about the pride. We talked to Manny Powell last week, and I was kind of building that point, like, hey, dude, can you play special teams so Woodard doesn't have to? As I said, I was corrected on that. Woodard's playing. But Manny Powell's like, yeah, no, I want to be out there. When they've shouted out freshmen, they've been Longshore talked about Jay Beasley, and Christian Moore talked about Jay Beasley, a freshman from Liberty. It's like he can do some things on special teams. Other guys were mentioned. Cody DeCambra is back in Vegas from Bishop Gorman, was at Oregon, has a chance, I think, to be a real contributor on the depth chart at defensive back. But he was being talked about as a guy who maybe can play on 3 different units. And it was pointed out to us that that's very rare that you play 3 or 4 units. And Shebas likes to use depth, likes to spread the wealth. But man, there's a pride and there's a drive for players. They're like, yeah, I want to be out there. And here's the other one. I love that as good as DeJesus was last year and as good as, the honors are this year, we talked to him a bunch of times last year about, he trips after 60 yards, doesn't score a touchdown. Like, he was really mad. He said the other day, he's like, I want to have 5+ touchdowns in the return game. I'm like, okay, you go for it.
And I think there's potential for that. All right. He got really close last year, didn't get one to the end zone, but he had a couple returns on punt and kickoff where he was maybe a block or 2 away, or maybe just a misstep away from taking it to the house. But that's the pride in special teams. And I think the returners, and obviously, we've talked about UNLV and how they've been spoiled with a line of good place kickers with Gutierrez and Pisano. But those guys get the highlights. Those guys get, the accolades, the all conference honors, whatever, what have you, because the spotlight's on the returner, it's on the kicker. For when we talk about special teams. But even the guys who are just running down and blocking, like it was like you don't see the amount of passion and dedication into the technique of those kinds of blocks. It's kind of like, if I get them, I get them. If I don't, I don't. Not at UNLV. It's like guys are pissed off if they don't get their block, if they don't get the right angle. And they all take a tremendous amount of pride. And just like Jacob feels like he needs to get 5, there's guys out there blocking for him that feels like it's their job to help him get the 5. And they'll be just as happy about it.
Caleb, Ricky White's one of the blockers. I mean, you got an All-American receiver who had 80, 90 catches, and I think Shebas was the one saying it the other day. He's like, this is, the guy who goes out there and he plays special teams as hard as he plays, in the offense. All right, let's finish talking about the quarterbacks. Caleb Herring, Steve Cofield, UNLV All Access Podcast. We do this every week. Season kicks off on August 31st. Home opener on September 7th. So I've seen some of the quarterback decisions come down around the country, right? Jade Mayava didn't win against Miller Moss. I don't know if he was going to win, but that's a topic for another day. Big one at Boise State where everyone is tweeting out recruiting rankings, which I said the other day on Cofield and Company. I'm like, recruiting rankings are stupid. I don't care where Malachi Nelson was ranked. It doesn't matter. It's water under the bridge now. He's got to earn the job at Boise. So Maddox Madsen wins that one. So I asked Barry Odom about, what do you do with the decision? And then how do you kind of massage the backups? And I think some other coaches would be like, they're the backup and they got to deal with it. Like, no. There's a science to this. There's a mental part of it. So here's Odom talking about just how important the backup is and how you kind of manage that situation. Because someone is going to be disappointed when they're not named the starter.
If Jaden wasn't ready when Doug went down, then our team wouldn't have done what they did. So whoever the number 2 is one play away from being the starter. And whoever the number 3 is a play away from being the backup. So that's easier in today's world to say than they actually do. I get that. That's the hard thing about quarterback is, there's one quarterback on the field. So whoever does not take the first snap against Houston, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. I am going to use and have used with quarterbacks over the years a story about the greatest competitor that I've ever been around in competition in competitive sport is Chase Daniel. I've asked and learned a lot from him. How did he do it? And he said, I prepared every single day like I was the starter. And when I took that approach, in my mind, I was the starter. Because if I was ever called up and my number was called, I wanted to be prepared and not let our team down. And what a great thing for me to hear. and I can relay that, and I can get the quarterbacks in communication with Chase, and he can talk through some of those things. I think that's a valuable piece. And then there were times that he was asked in whatever organization he was with to be the opposing quarterback. And the dude would go in and watch as much film on the other team and quarterback as he could to get the mannerisms down, to get the cadence down, to get the body language down on everything, to look and give his team a look to have a chance to win, all while being the backup quarterback and understanding what he had to do.
Chase Daniel in the NFL, 13 seasons. He started 5 games. Why do you think he stayed on rosters? Why was he a coveted backup? He got paid money, too, to be the backup. It's just what Barry Odom said. You have to treat it like you're a starter. You got to be a leader. You got to be ready. I mean, obviously, we know that Cam Friel is like that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to sit here and be like kids these days, but all this stuff about not getting the starting quarterback gig at the beginning of the season, who cares? You're probably going to play. You're probably going to get a chance to wrestle the job at some point. Starting quarterback could get hurt. So I think they brought in guys and seniors and Sluka and Haj Malik who will be able to deal with whoever doesn't get the job.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point to this, is that these guys are all senior guys who are on their last stint. After this year, there's not any time to sulk, right? There's not like, oh, I'll just mail it in for next time. It's like, no, I'm a senior. I'm giving my all to this year, one way or another. I'm going to contribute as best I can. I want to feel useful as a mature leader. I understand that. I've long said that backup quarterback in the NFL is probably the best job in America. That's like if you can make it as a backup in the NFL, you stay around for a long time doing the right thing. But it brings up a point that I would like to say, because for all of and this is for young quarterbacks, and for all quarterbacks that hear this, it's a lot of attention and a lot of praise and adoration is given to the quarterback position, and I understand why. There's a lot of reason to be big-headed and to think highly of yourself if you're a quarterback, and to put yourself above others in that regard. But being a quarterback, the mentality of a quarterback has to be, you are the best teammate. And all you're doing is distributing the ball, getting everybody lined up. You're being like the team mom on the field. Like it just to make it like what I'm trying. You have to be the ultimate teammate. That extends to if you're not the starting quarterback. Like every quarterback has to. That's a character trait of quarterbacks. You have to be a good teammate. I don't know a quarterback that can be good at his job by not being a good teammate. Like if you're an asshole in the locker room, it ain't gonna work. Right? If people don't believe in you, people don't see you as a teammate, they're not gonna ever do anything you ask them to do on the field. So I think quarterback competition kind of bring this out, because you watch after somebody's gonna get crowned, somebody's gonna be the starter. Only one can do it. But the other guys have to be good teammates still. Be a good teammate to the guy who won the job, right? And we saw, like you mentioned, Cam Friel be that for Jay Maiava last year. Right? He was always in his corner, helping, doing his part as a teammate. Then there's the element of what your career looks like as a backup. You have to be ready to go. Like and I from experience, I understand how that feels. Like to be the backup, get your number called in the middle of a game, and have to go out and perform. A lot of times you're going out because things are bad. Whether your quarterback got hurt, you're down big, and the guy loses his job, and you have to go and try to help out. You have to be able to handle that situation with poise, leadership, and be effective. You can't do that preparing like a backup. So preparing like a starter is a priority. UNLV, and I'm going to put a date to this, and I might be wrong. Mark will come get me. 1996 was the last season that UNLV had a quarterback start the season and start every game in the season. And in 1996, and I think that is correct. I know since I've been involved with UNLV, it has not happened. There has not been a quarterback start the season, start every game, and finish the season for UNLV. At some point, the other quarterbacks will get a shot, right? And you hate to say that, but the game of football is such. It's just the way it goes. Maybe that streak will change. But to date, 1996 is the last time a quarterback started every game in the season for UNLV. If you don't get it in Houston, if you're not, the starter in week 1, 2, or 3, there is a strong possibility you will get a chance to play in a football game. And when you get your chance, what are you going to do with it? That's my theme for this year for everybody at UNLV, but for the quarterback position too, we can isolate to them. the eyes are on you. Everybody's watching you. What are you going to do with it? Right? UNLV has 11 nationally televised games. What are you going to do with it? Preseason watch list for everybody. Okay, we're watching. What are you going to do with it? Quarterback competition. Okay, you won the job at Houston. What are you going to do with it? If you don't do it, the next guy's waiting to do it. So everybody has to have that mentality right now. What are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this newfound expectation for UNLV at the quarterback position, running back position, throughout the team? What are you going to do with this spotlight? You better not wilt. If you fade under pressure, they'll be hell to pay. But I think this group understands that. The quarterbacks understand that. They're all mature enough to handle that pressure, and I think handle it with grace.
Well, that'll do it for this edition of UNLV All Access Podcast. We sent out the audio version pretty early on after we do this on Tuesday when we tape. We put up a video version up on YouTube. You can go to the Cofield and Company page and watch the entire podcast up there. I'm not going to ask you to make a prediction, but I was talking to one of the UNLV content creators who works with Joe Arrigo, Jeff Waddalove, and he made a statement, something to the effect of, I think they've decided a while ago who's going to be the starting quarterback. And then I pressed him. I'm like, well, who is it? Because I don't think they decided a while ago. He actually said he believes Sluka is and has been QB1. I think there's still a race. I think Sluka can gain ground. I think for this first game, because he's been here longer, he's a little less of a wild card, which makes Sluka very interesting. I think Haj Malik will get the start. Now, I'll also tell you, and we've said this a bunch of times, that there could be a triple or situation on the depth chart. It may say starting quarterback, Haj, or Sluka, or Friel. So that's my logic on this. Now, that could change in the next 11 days, but I do believe in game one that both Haj and Sluka play.
I will.
I'm not going to force you to put yourself out there. Your rep's bigger than mine to protect.
I'm going to say I concur with everything you said. And I don't think we will know whether or not the coaches know. I'm not trying to dissect, the coaching talk in the media game. I think it's just the way that this will play out. I think we'll know week one. I think we'll know when things kick off. We'll see a quarterback run out and know who the starter is. I think I'm just anticipating that. I've always been a wait and see guy. I'm perfectly fine not making predictions, and even if I did make one, I'd be perfectly fine being wrong. I just say what I see, and I agree. And I said this from the beginning of camp. I think the priority for UNLV football this year at the quarterback position will be taking care of the ball and running this offense efficiently. You have too many weapons to put pressure on your quarterback to do something special, right? Like doing the basics is the best thing you can do right now. Get Ricky the ball, get DeJesus the ball. Don't fumble in the backfield. Don't have any bad center quarterback exchange. All that stuff is, I think, the priority. Whoever can do that the best will, I think, get the nod, at least get the start for week one. All that other stuff might play a factor later on. But I think for right now, I agree with your assessment of where the quarterbacks are. And I don't know how they're going to decide between what the experience of Haj Malik in this offense does versus what I think looks like a more explosive and sporadic Matt Sluka, right? And I say sporadic, and maybe that's not the best word, but combustible. Like I can see how Matt Sluka's game is combustible for an offense like this. So it's going to be interesting to see how they decide. What I will say, though, whoever starts, and I think whoever starts, there's going to be an immense amount of pressure on the first snap, the first series. And I'm more interested in not who's taking the start, but how the start goes, because there's a lot of different ways you can approach breaking them into their first Division I college start, right? Like you can go for a big play out of the gate to calm their nerves. Do you play it safe and get their feet? I always thought getting tackled for the first time was good, like to settle my nerves in when I was playing. How do you settle the quarterback who does take the start into the rhythm so that the jitters? You imagine like your first game against a Big 12 opponent in Houston, a well-known national opponent, and you're on the road in a hostile environment to start the college football season. Like the nerves, how are you going to call the plays to settle that down? You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm more interested in rather than who's going to be taking the snap. It's how that snap's going to go with whoever's back there. So we'll see. It's going to be down to the wire. Like I said, I don't think we're going to know till somebody runs out there and calls the cadence. And then maybe they'll run some sort of trick play where one quarterback's out there and the other one's lined up at receiver. I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. I think all three are capable of getting wins, and I'm excited for all of them in this opportunity for the Go-Go.